If you're a serious PC gamer, then you've probably heard of a brand called Skytech. And out of all the gaming PCs that I've reviewed, Skytech has always given the best performance for my dollar. And today we're gonna find out if they've continued in that trend in this honest and unbiased review of the Skytech Eclipse. This PC is fully loaded with a 4090 GPU and 13th gen i9 CPU and 32 gigabytes of 5200 megahertz DDR5 RAM. And for those of you that are on a budget, I also did all of my testing on the i7-480 version of this PC as well. I'm gonna quickly take you through the unboxing and what's included, gaming and creator benchmarks, design and build quality, the internals, thermals, fan noise, overall ease of use, pricing breakdowns and comparing its price to performance ratios against the competition, and my overall top pros and cons. If you decide against this PC after anything that I say in this video, just keep watching, because I'm also going to be sharing with you some alternative PCs that I recommend for every budget. Links down below for all the computers that I mentioned. I guarantee that by the end of this video, you will know if this PC is right for you or not. But if you still have any questions after watching this entire video, just shoot me a comment, and if you're publicly subscribed, I guarantee a personal response. All right, now let's rewind back into the past and check out the unboxing. First thing you'll notice when opening the box is this Fantex bag with an insane amount of extra power supply and motherboard cables, Wi-Fi antennas, GPU adapter cable, extra CPU bracket, your super beefy power cable, a very long Supreme GPU support bracket. Wow, that's kind of cheap. The zipper already popped off the cable bag. Then included with all the Skytech pre-builts, a Skytech gaming mouse, pretty decent for something that comes free basically, a nice grippy rubber material on the top, pretty nice design overall, but I'm not a huge fan of the dashed red cord. And then in this long box, we've got a Skytech gaming keyboard. Nothing special with the RGB off, but it looks pretty cool with everything on. As far as the actual feel and comfortability of the keys though, I'd say it's pretty basic and average. And then dumping everything else out, we've got a Skytech gaming folder with a confirmation of all the quality checks they did, your maintenance guide, and then your troubleshooting guide if you run into any issues. A pretty massive MSI Supreme gaming mousepad, and lastly an accessory box for the Eclipse G500A case that this PC is built from, which contains extra hard drive brackets and screws. Design-wise, the Skytech Eclipse looks pretty slick. I like it a lot. Love the RGB lighting effects and accents of LED strips on the inside bottom edge and front top edge. Not too big at 20 inches tall, 19 inches deep, and 9.5 inches wide, but definitely big enough and more than enough room for airflow and future upgrading. There's absolutely no tools necessary to access the internals on this one. You just stick your fingers in this front edge and pull the glass door open. We've got three pretty massive 140 millimeter intake fans here on the front, but only one exhaust fan on the back. And it is a little weird that there's absolutely no fans on the top. The three on the front are actually part of an all-in-one liquid cooling system for the CPU. This Thermaltake cooling block uses a liquid to transfer the heat from the CPU up through these tubes into this giant radiator where the heat is then spread out. Normally that's at the top and then it gets blown out of the case, but because this acts as the computer's only intake fans, that heat then gets blown back into the case. And then some of it will naturally rise out of the case and some get sucked out the back of the case, but it would do a much better job if it actually had fans on the top. And we'll show you how that affected thermals here in a sec. Next to that cooling block, we've got our two sticks of RGB Kingston Fury DDR5 RAM at 5200 megahertz. Then right beneath the CPU, underneath this black metal heatsink, we've got our 1 terabyte Kingston NV2 SSD, which is our main drive that the operating system is installed on. And we'll show you the speeds that we got for that here in a sec as well. And just below that, the most expensive and most important part of this computer, our 4090 graphics card. You may have noticed that this is actually a different one than you saw in the unboxing. The original one did not work right out of the box. Not uncommon, unfortunately, with how much these computers are just thrown around during shipping, but I was pretty impressed that after talking to support, this GPU actually came in 2 days after I called them. It's a fairly heavy and large GPU, but definitely has a solid and premium feel to it. And then below that on display is our Gamdias Helios P2 1300G gold power supply. 1300 watts is a lot of power, so definitely pretty future-proof on the PSU. And opening up the back door the same we did the front, we've got our cable management, 3 slots for 2.5-inch SSD bays. And behind these flaps, we've got room for 3.5-inch hard drives, but just without the brackets for them pre-installed like you would normally see on these type of pre-builds. For the ports on the top, we've got a headphone and microphone combo jack, 2 USB 3.0 ports, a USB-C 3.1, and a reset button. And the power button is sort of hidden in the design of this case right here on the front. On the back, a flash BIOS button, 2 USB 2.0s, and a PS2 port for older keyboards and mice. This port is technically a lower latency than USB ports, and some gamers prefer it for that very reason. We've got an HDMI and DisplayPort directly on the motherboard to give you access to your computer even if your GPU is acting up, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1s at 5 gigabits per second, 2 USB 2.0s, a 2.5G Ethernet port, a USB 3.2 Gen 2 at 10 gigabits per second, and a super fast USB-C 3.2 Gen 2X2 at 20 gigabits per second. Then we've got our Wi-Fi antennas and our audio ports, and then on the back of our 4090 GPU, 1 HDMI 2.1 and 3 display ports. For the software, the main program that you'll be using is the MSI Center app. The most important tab is this user scenario section. This is where you're going to fine-tune your performance profiles based on whether you want extreme performance with loud fans or you just want a computer that's quieter with more heat and lower performance, or custom and set all your fan speeds manually. With the Mystic Light section, you can choose from a bunch of different RGB animation presets to fully customize your PC for every component separately or all together if you want. This Game Sync will sync the LED lighting with the game that you're playing, but unfortunately, there's not that many that actually support it. And then of course, you've got a bunch of helpful stats for your CPU, GPU, and RAM in this hardware monitoring section. And if you want further control, you can hit the delete button when booting up your machine and access all of these extra settings and overclocking functions within the BIOS. The one that I always opt for is making sure that I'm enabling XMP RAM right here. And you can see that the somewhat lower end motherboard that's included in this build is the MSI Pro Z790P Wi-Fi motherboard. When it came to the fan noise, these were my results after testing each of the main fan profiles. In quiet mode, it was just a little over 41 decibels. And then when moving up to performance mode, it brought the fan noise up to about 43 decibels. And full speed brought it up pretty high to about 51 decibels. But honestly, you don't really gain anything with full speed fans, so most likely most of you are going to stay within performance mode, which you can see it's right around the lower average compared to most, but I would have thought it would have been one of the lowest considering it has 3 less fans than most other pre-builds. For the thermals, in our thermal imaging time lapse from the moment the computer is turned on to when it was fully engaged in gaming, you can see that heat is building up on the glass right next to the GPU. Opening up the glass panel reveals just a little bit more of what's going on here, as the side of the 4090 GPU does generate quite a bit of heat. A lot of that heat successfully escaped out the back fan and top vents, but it definitely would have done a much better job if it actually had exhaust fans on the top like most other pre-builds. The majority of our testing was spent in actual gameplay though. These were our CPU temps for several different games at 4K. You can see that compared to the rest, it was a little bit more than average. And averaging all of these temperatures of all these games together and comparing with almost 20 of the past gaming PCs that I've reviewed, you can see just how it stands up against the rest. Not bad, but I expected good CPU temperatures with this one considering it had access to cool fresh air from the outside of the case. And then moving up to 4K and sorting this chart by the GPU, because high resolution gaming puts more pressure on the GPU and less on the CPU, you can see that we've got almost the hottest 4090 GPU that we've ever seen, second only to the Alienware Aurora R15. Just as I predicted, the GPU got hotter than it should have because it got preheated air from the CPU. Honestly though, I do think it's more important to keep the CPU cool because usually that's the one that's most at risk for thermal throttling. And as you can see in our individual game temps and 4K for the GPU, even with one of the hottest GPUs, it still did not get into throttling territory. Performance and gaming benchmarks. And up next, the most important part of this review, the price to performance ratios. For Cinebench R23, which simulates its 3D rendering power, we got a multi-core score of 39,758 and a single core score of 2,209. This was the fastest multi-core score that I've ever seen in a pre-build. Pretty much all rendering software can utilize multiple cores, so that's the most important score. Surprisingly though, the i7 480 version of this PC had a lower than average score in that category. Another helpful test for you 3D renderers is the V-Ray benchmark. And these were our CUDA RTX and overall V-Ray performance scores for the top tier i9 4090 version. A bit higher than average for the GPU scores, and near the very top for the V-Ray performance scores. That's pretty impressive. GPU-based rendering scores demonstrate how well a PC handles real-time viewport rendering and real-time lighting, while CPU-based rendering scores demonstrate how well it handles the more advanced, more realistic rendering that takes a lot longer to calculate. And for those of you who use Blender, we got a very high score when it came to the GPU. It actually got 3rd place in these Blender GPU tests, and then 2nd place when it came to the Blender CPU scoring. And the last benchmarks for creatives before we get into gaming are the Puget Benchmarks. For DaVinci Resolve, we got 2983, the absolute best score that I've ever seen in a pre-built. Now for the Adobe Puget Benchmarks, I'm not going to show how these numbers compare to previous pre-builts because a recent update has changed how this benchmark works. These are just the current raw numbers so that you compare with your current PC. Adobe Premiere 1087, Adobe Photoshop 1513, and Adobe After Effects 1344. For the SSD, the main drive that everything was installed on, we got speeds of almost 3,800 megabytes read and about 2,700 megabytes write. This is honestly a little disappointing that Skytech paired this top tier PC with an SSD that's basically half the speeds of the other pre-builts that I've tested in this category. For 3D Mark, which is a great benchmark used to predict a computer's overall game ability, we got an overall score of 31,639, a graphics score of 36,530, and a CPU score of 17,991. 4th place only to the top 2 Corsair Vengeance pre-builts and the custom NZXT BLD that we tested. Actual gaming benchmarks are probably what you guys care the most about though. And these were our average FPS results that we got for several games at their highest preset settings in HD. It did fare pretty well against some of the other 13th gen i9s with 4090s that I tested. And then averaging the FPS of all these games against almost 20 of the most recent pre-built PCs that I reviewed, it came in at 2nd to last place out of all the 4090s that I've tested. But stay with me because it gets better as we up the resolution and once we factor in the price to performance ratios. It did slightly better at 1440p, moving up on the charts just a little bit. And then at 4K, you can see that with the individual game tests that each PC's maximum FPS were a lot closer to each other. The i9 4090 version of this PC ranking on the lower end in that top tier category, and the i7 480 version performing about average compared to the other similar spec PCs in that category. On a side note, it still blows me away that the more budget-friendly Skytech Azure 2 with an i5 and 4070 Ti is actually faster than all of the top tier PCs last year with i9s and 3090s. Those PCs last year used to be well over $4,000. That Skytech Azure 2 from this year is half that price. Alright, so this is how everything ranks when comparing raw performance, but let's check out what changes when we factor in the price to performance ratios. Right now, at the time of this recording, the more affordable i7 480 version will make your wallet $2,900 lighter. And if that's just understandably too much for you, then stick around for my PC recommendations for every budget. The maxed out version of this PC, $3,400, which is actually several $100s less than average. The similar spec HP Omen 45L that we also reviewed was only about $80 more than that. At one point, it was on sale for only about $3,000, which was insane. After I hyped it up, I think demand went up, and then HP kicked their prices back up, unfortunately. And then the Alienware Aurora R15, about $300 more than this PC. The Corsair Vengeance i7 400, about $550 more. Corsair Vengeance PCs are more reliable though, as they have double the warranty of most other pre-builts, with a 2-year warranty versus 1 year from everybody else. The Legion Tower 7i Gen 8, about $600 more. And my favorite, if money was no object, the decked out Corsair Vengeance i8 100 at a whopping $1,000 more. And this leads me to the most important part of this review, the price to performance ratios. At 1080p gaming, you can see that this top tier version of the Skytech Eclipse is actually the best value i9 4090 PC that we've seen yet, with the lowest dollar per FPS ratio out of all of them. Numbers tightened up just a little bit with 1440p gaming, but this top tier Skytech Eclipse had the best dollar per FPS ratio at this resolution as well. The i7 480 version though was trumped by the Corsair Vengeance i7 400 equivalent. You can see that because of the new price drop of the HP Omen 25L, that one is the overall winner for the most performance for your money. That's a much less expensive PC in a completely different category though. Nowhere near as fast as these i9 4090 PCs. But now check this out. Because this top spec version of the Skytech Eclipse did so well at 4K gaming, and it's one of the least expensive ones, it actually beat out every single machine that we've ever tested when it came to its dollar per FPS ratio by quite a bit. That is pretty impressive. Now, if you're understandably at a completely different price point, these are my recommendations for every budget. I'll also have updated links in the comments and description for all of them. If you need to be under $2,900 for the lower spec version of this PC, I would go with this i7 480 version of the CyberPower PC Gamer Supreme for just over $2,600. Basically the same specs as the less expensive version of this i7 400 that we tested, but quite a bit cheaper. Although I do prefer Corsairs, that one's a good option if you can't afford Corsairs. In my experience though, CyberPower PCs do tend to get a little hotter than most, so just keep that in mind. If $2,600 is still too much for those with a budget closer to $2,000, $2,000, the Skytech Azure 2 that I recently reviewed is what I recommend. For around $1,500, I would go with the new CyberPower PC Gamer Supreme with the 13th Gen i7 and 4060 Ti. Closer to $1,000, and I'd get its little brother, the CyberPower PC Gamer Extreme with a 13th Gen i5 and 4060 GPU and 16 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. And for under $1,000, at only $880, I recommend the new Victus by HP with a new 13th Gen i5, and then make sure to select at least a 1660 Super GPU before checkout. This is the bare minimum that I would recommend for semi-decent gaming though. That is not a gaming PC for those that like to crank their graphics settings up or game at 4K if you want a semi-decent frame rate and responsiveness. If you're coming from a console like PS5 or the Xbox Series X and you want your graphics to at least match that, then you want a 3060 GPU before checkout, and then you might as well spend $10 extra for a 4060 GPU. I've also done quite a few monitor reviews lately, so make sure to subscribe and check those out, or if you just want to save some time and take my word for it. My absolute favorite so far was the Corsair Xeneon Flex, which is a massive 45-inch OLED ultrawide, which you can use flat or bend it with an 800R curve. That one is $1,500 though. My second favorite, which actually has the best picture, was the slightly smaller Alienware AW3423 DWF 34-inch curved OLED gaming monitor at $900. Or with a budget closer to $400, I would go with the Samsung Odyssey G5 Ultrawide curved. If you just need something decent to get by, then I would go with the Samsung Odyssey G5 1C 32-inch for only $250. Pros and cons. My top cons for this PC, number one are the SSD speeds. People expect the fastest when they drop this kind of money on a pre-built PC, and it is a little disappointing that Skytech threw in an SSD that's basically half the speeds as the other SSDs that I've tested in other pre-builts in this category. And number two were the GPU temps. It's not that they were absolutely horrible, but it is the second hottest 4090 GPU that I've ever seen. This was due to the fact that the only intake fans on this PC were also part of the liquid cooling system, which basically blew hot air from the CPU back into the case. And some people care a lot about this because keeping your GPU too hot for too long will shorten the overall lifespan of the most expensive part of your computer. My overall top pros for this PC, number one, is the price to performance ratios. This PC is very fast. Not the fastest in this i9 4090 category, but because it's priced well, it has the best price to performance ratio out of every PC that I've ever tested. The i7 480 version also had the best price to performance ratio in that category as well. And number two is upgradability. 3 extra M.2 SSD slots, 3 slots for 2.5-inch SSD bays, an extra PCIe expansion card slot that you actually have access to even with a larger 4090 GPU, and a modular power supply make this PC very flexible for upgrading. You also have room for 2 3.5-inch mechanical hard drives on the bottom. The brackets just aren't pre-installed like they are on most other pre-builts that we've tested. Overall, despite a few issues that I had with this PC, I would definitely say it's an incredible gaming or creator PC, with by far the best value of any i9 4090 PC that I've ever tested, that I actually recommend. Make sure to subscribe and bookmark this video, as I'm going to post updated links in the comments and description as prices change. Now, if you do decide to purchase this PC or any of the others that I mentioned, then please remember to use my affiliate links in the comments and description below, as I get a small commission at no cost to you for every single purchase made. And it's actually a major factor in keeping this channel going and getting better and better for you. I'd also like to personally thank all of my members for their monthly support of this channel. Also, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with notifications turned on to stay up to date with all of my latest tech and gaming PCs. Thanks for watching, guys. I love you guys. God bless.